Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So I'm not gonna lie to you, this video is partially being filmed because I had an afternoon where the house was completely empty that I wasn't expecting. I had done my makeup and everything and I just thought, I need to film something, but I've not prepped to film anything. What can I do that requires very little prep? Well, I guess I can film myself reading. So I have accumulated quite a few books recently, both in the book haul that I did a couple of weeks ago and also because I did end up going to York finally at last and I accumulated a few books there, and there should potentially be a book haul for those books coming very, very soon, which all in all means that I have more books on my TBR than I usually do. The old TBR trolley is a little bit fuller than it normally is, and I'm basically just trying to adjust to that new dynamic with my TBR. I'm trying to not be weird about it in my head and try not to freak out about it and like want to impose some sort of book buying ban on myself because that's never fun for me. And I've been contemplating a lot more doing something that I don't usually do, which is reading multiple books at once. Usually at any one time I might have an audiobook on the go and a physical book that I'm reading, but usually not much more than that. I know a lot of people tend to do the opposite of that, where they are constantly like in the middle of multiple books. I mean, that's why the whole finish-a-thon read along exists, for people who do tend to be like halfway through a book and never seem to finish stuff. But I feel like it kind of makes sense. If I've got a lot of books on my TBR, then maybe I need to just be reading more books at once than I normally am. And I really enjoy watching other people doing the try a chapter book tag, basically where you pick like 5 or 6 books that you haven't read yet, that you have been meaning to pick up, and you just read one chapter and then you decide from there which one you are going to continue reading. For some people, I know they use this as a way of culling down their TBR. They will read a few books and if from the first chapter they've not been grabbed, they'll put it to the side, they might unhaul it. That's not going to be the case for me. I definitely want to hold on to all of these books and I want to read at least half of it before I make the decision to throw it away. I thought for this I would pick 5 books that I think are most likely to kind of languish for a little while if I didn't pick them up immediately. So the 5 books that I'm going to read today as part of my try a chapter video are City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. This, from what I understand, is set in the 1940s and it's centering around 2 best friends as they navigate their lives around New York City and kind of like the glamorous parties and just growing up. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This is set, I think, 1969, set around the marshes in North Carolina and following this one girl who's kind of ostracized from society, and I believe like a murder takes place and a lot of the blame is put onto her and we're trying to work out whether or not she did it, I think, and she's also falling in love. A lot of mystery around this book for me and what the plot is. 3 Women by Taddeo. This is non-fiction, but I believe from what I've heard from other people, it reads very much like fiction. This, as the title suggests, follows the lives of 3 women and I believe is kind of following how their sex lives and their sexuality really affects how they live their lives. Wife After Wife by Olivia Hayfield. This is the modern reimagining of Henry VIII and his 6 wives book that I got very, very excited for in my Finish-a-thon reading vlog. I'm really keen to get to this and kind of give my thoughts about it. I am highly considering reading this and kind of doing a history grad reacts to Henry VIII modern retelling. I've been kind of teasing the idea of doing like a history student reacts to historical fiction kind of series because there's a lot of historical fiction that I haven't read, like Philippa Gregory. I've never read anything by, and I feel like it might be really, really funny for me to do a video where I'm kind of reacting to these historical fiction books. Let me know what you think. That might be a disaster, I don't know. Then we have Expectation by Anna Hope. This is a contemporary novel which is following the lives of 3 women as they grow up and find that their expectations of adulthood do not quite match their reality, and they are all kind of jealous of each other for different things that have gone right in their lives. And I think it's kind of like how you don't really realise how other people perceive your reality. You think that you are really struggling and failing at life and other people are looking at you thinking, gosh, I wish I was like you. So yeah, quite a women-focused selection here. I think all of these books were written by women and are all about women, so that's very interesting. So yes, I shall be reading a chapter from each of those books today and just giving you my thoughts on what I've read of the introductions to these books. So let's get started. So I think I'm going to try and read at different places around my house just so, you know, it all looks a little bit different, is, you know, a little fun. But yes, I've got my little stack of books ready to read. I think we will just go from the top and work our way down. So I will be starting with Expectation by Anna Hope. What bookmark do I have in here? Oh, I've got a book depository bookmark. A. Okay, done with the first chapter. This was only a 5-page chapter to introduce the book, so it didn't take that long at all. It's basically focused around a weekend of these 3 friends who live together in London and just kind of commenting on how free they feel, how like things feel full of possibilities, and yet you also get the sense from this introduction that this kind of dream-like, romanticized, idealized life is so tenuous, it's not going to last forever. They're kind of standing at this precipice of adulthood. They're not quite, you know, the young things that they used to be, but then they know that, like, adulthood, of this idea of adulthood, of getting married and having kids, is coming, but it's not quite there for them yet. Like I say, it has a very dreamlike quality, and I feel like it's just kind of setting you up for like the next chapter, or whenever it is that they get to a few years later when they are like married and having kids or trying to have children. I feel like it's going to be a very sharp jolt into reality. I really enjoyed this, but I couldn't help but feel like a little bit of jealousy, because like living in London in my 20s, living in central London with all my friends is like something that I thought was going to happen, and so far has not happened yet, not materialized yet. So I feel like if they are complaining at all during this, I'm going to be like, girl, you're living the life I want. But yes, so far really intriguing, really enjoying this. New space. The plus side of still living with your parents is that there is an abundance of places that you can read a book. I'm very, very grateful. So I've got my cup of tea, I've got a fresh bottle of water, and my books. So as you can see, Wife After Wife is the next book on the list. However, I feel like I want to save that till the end. I feel like that's gonna be the treat book. So instead, we're gonna go swiftly on to 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo. Okay, so I finished the first chapter, or the prologue, at least, of 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo, and so far, I'm not so sure about this one yet. So this book opens with Lisa Taddeo talking about her mother, who in her 20s, she was living in Italy. And Lisa Taddeo recounts how her mother, when she would go to work, she would be followed by a man in his 60s who would basically masturbate to her all the way to work. Then starts to talk about how her mother let this man do this to her, which I was a little bit like, really? That's your take, Lisa, on this man? That she let him do that to her? I don't know, she keeps on saying it. She keeps saying, my mother let this man do this to her, even when like she talks to her brother about this, and her brother points out quite rightly, it was the 1960s in Italy. Even if she did go to somebody, if she went to the police, they'd have probably laughed in her face and said that it wasn't a big deal. And yet she seems to be kind of like dismissive of that. And she keeps on saying, my mother let this man do this to her. Why did she let him do this to her? And I didn't like that. And then she's kind of giving a bit of a brief introduction to the 3 women that she's going to talk about. And she talks about Maggie, who is the first woman that we will come to meet in this, who her story is that when she was in high school, she had a relationship with her married teacher. And Delia is talking about how she was fascinated by this case because, you know, they never had penetrative sex together. He performed oral sex on her and it was found out, and, you know, there was a whole case with it. And the way that Lisa Taddeo kind of, have I been saying Delia? I've been saying Delia through this whole thing, haven't I? I think I've got this in my head. But Lisa Taddeo is talking about it, and she's saying about how, like, really, if you think about it, Maggie was the one who had the power because, you know, like, they never had penetrative sex, and she was the student and he was the teacher. She held all of the power because the law was on her side. And I'm just like, that seems like a bit of a reach to me. And I think especially after reading My Dark Vanessa, which really does go into these nuances around, like, power and abuse of power between teachers and students, and relationships between teachers and students, and how, you know, in the time you can think to yourself and you can justify to yourself that you were in control and that you did have the power, but actually because of the power dynamic between a teacher and a student, that can inherently not be true. As much as you can tell yourself that you were in control, that's not true. The teacher was in the dominant role. Like, I don't know, it really kind of grossed me out the way that she was talking about this relationship. So I don't know, I think I will continue on with this to see if it gets any better, but so far I'm kind of a bit about how they're talking about women and their sexual power. Oh, and that was the other thing. She was saying that because the case got found out, because their relationship got found out, that, you know, like, the law was denying Maggie of her sexuality and her sexual experience, and, you know, saying it was wrong and it wasn't wrong. And I'm just like the teacher was having a relationship with her. Like, no, that is wrong in any metric. No. So yeah, I read the chapter of that book. Next one, please. Thank you. Reading the first chapter of Where the Crawdads Sing. This was really interesting. I found it kind of similar to expectation in that the first chapter has this very dreamlike quality. It's being told mostly from the perspective, from third person, limited perspective of children. So it has that kind of dreamy, hazy quality, and it's kind of giving you the history around the marsh, which this book largely takes place in, and as a result is very, very atmospheric. Very, very vivid descriptions of the marsh and the history around it and what it means to the people who live there. Considering that I'm not really a very big fan of, like, stories that are very much like man living on the land and the land being its own character, I was surprised at how much this got to me, just these descriptions of this land. It's really, really beautiful, and I can see why people really liked this from the little that I've read so far. But moving swiftly on to the next book we go. Sunlight glare, but it's okay. But I've read the last two books, yay. So first up is City of Girls. Now the first chapter was around about 2 pages long, so I did go on into the next one. The first chapter, it's basically setting up that it's like 2010, and the main character is being asked in her old age basically to tell this young girl how she knew her father and how it was that he came to love her and why. And then it reverts back to 1940, and she's basically recounting the beginning of her life, how she wasn't very good at school, how she always had an eye for clothing and was a very good sewer, a very good seamstress, and her eventually going to New York to kind of get her life together. And because it's being told very much from this perspective of an older woman looking back, she's constantly referencing the fact that she is telling this story to the character Angela. So it's got a very similar kind of like nostalgic feel, but also it's very, very chatty, which I don't think I quite expected. I feel in a lot of ways that the main character of this is really trying to relate and be kind of like down with the kids who she's talking to. So she's got a much more colloquial voice than I really expected her to. You also get a sense from these first couple of chapters that the main character is kind of vain. She's very, very much obsessed with appearance, and because she is a seamstress, she always points out people's clothing, and she says she never forgets an outfit. But there's this great moment where like she's in a pub or a cafe, and she just describes how she would just stare at herself, stare at her opinion, because she knew that she was gorgeous, and it was just like, oh, all right, fine. So I'm wondering if this is something that she kind of like grows out of through the book, or if that's always how she appears. I think it's interesting. I'd be interested to see how the story progresses, but it's not my favourite out of the 5 that I've read so far. And then we have the one that we've all been waiting for, Wife After Wife, the Henry VIII retelling. So the first chapter takes place in 2018 and is just kind of like the framing device for the rest of the story. I think it goes back to 1985 and then the story goes forward. But we see Harry Rose, who is this businessman, and he's interacting with his new secretary or PA, and you can kind of tell immediately that Olivia Hayfield has really gotten this modern day Henry VIII right down pat. He is the like stereotypical sleazy businessman, but I feel like she's done it in a way that very much fits Henry VIII. You can still get this sense of his insecurities and that he wants to be seen as being very with it and trendy, but a lot of his own opinions always seem to seep through. There's a real divergence in how he's presenting himself and how he actually behaves. It's interesting seeing Henry VIII in this dynamic of 2018 because he's kind of commenting on the kind of power dynamic, the sexual power dynamic, and especially how businesses are meant to be becoming more aware of like sexual misconduct from higher ups, and you know, treating the women properly, like they are humans. And in his inner monologue he's complaining about that and being like, oh, I can't even give a woman a compliment anymore, all the while he's, you know, staring through his secretary's blouse trying to look at her boobs and is like, There were also some fun little references to Harry's wound on his leg and that he's going to have to go see Dr. Butts again, and him talking about getting into a car accident with his good friend Charles, and I was like, hey, I see what you're doing. So this was good fun to read the first couple of chapters on. I don't know how much I think she's going to be able to sustain this all the way through, but the opening was just really, really fun to read. So how do I think I would rank them? I think definitely my bottom is 3 Women. I don't know, something about this introduction just didn't sit right with me, though I am open to seeing how it changes as the book goes on. Then I would say City of Girls. I thought it was interesting, but the narrator, the main perspective, I don't know, was not my favourite out of the books that I've read. Then I'd probably say Where the Crawdads Sings. I think this is the most beautiful writing and the most lyrical of what I've read so far, though as I say, it isn't my typical genre, so I think that's just kind of ranked it slightly lower for me, but I feel like a lot of people would really like this from what I've read so far. Then I'd probably say Expectation. I think if Wife After Wife hadn't been in here, then this would have been top, but the fun that I'm having from Wife After Wife, I feel like Expectation is probably going to wind up being a better book. But the hilarity that I'm getting from Wife After Wife so far, and just seeing how they are portraying this character of Henry VIII in the modern day, I'm just finding so enjoyable. So this is my order so far of what I'm most intrigued to pick up next and what I want to continue with. Let me know if you've read any of these, or if there are any of these books that you are interested in. Let me know what you're currently reading, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.